5 days after the joining of the two lines, regular train service began. What had taken 4 to 6 months by wagon now only took 7 days. The early journey west was a magic carpet ride to a mysterious and wild new world. The passengers experienced awesome new landscapes and wildlife: antelope, prairie dogs, coyotes, and the last remaining buffalo. For many travelers, seeing the Rocky Mountains was a childhood dream come true. One man wrote, "My boyish dreams were realized. For hours at the school desk I have pondered over the map and wandered in imagination with Lewis and Clark, the hunters and trappers, and early immigrants. And here lay the first great range in the pureness of white, distant to be sure, but there it lay, enshrined in beauty." Railroad Traveler, 1871. Passengers would also see a rougher, more hostile landscape from their window. A wasteland littered with painful reminders of pioneers who had come before them. The early passengers quickly learned that even their own journey west was no smooth ride to paradise. Railroad travel was dangerous in the early years. Train wrecks and derailments were common, killing and injuring countless passengers and railroadmen. Boilers blew up, bridges collapsed under the weight of trains. Brittle iron tracks cracked, primitive brakes overheated and failed. The lack of a signal system sometimes caused two trains to be accidentally switched onto the same track and sent speeding into each other. The wood passenger cars seemed almost to self-destruct on impact.
Passengers could be crushed and thrown out. Windows would shatter because there was no safety plate glass in that day. Stoves would overturn, spilling hot coals through the crushed and broken wood, and instantly trains were set on fire. Cars would fall into rivers, off of bridges.
Weather was a major problem. In snowstorms, the train could be stranded for days in the middle of nowhere.
Often when we came to a stop, only the top of the stack of the front engine would be visible. All this time, the snow kept coming down day and night, until the only signs of a railroad across the range were the tops of the telegraph poles. Cy Warman, 1870.
Even in fair weather, the first Transcontinental Railroad running from Omaha, Nebraska to Sacramento, California, had problems. In the race to build the line, there was naturally a long list of defects: unsafe bridges, tunnels too narrow, roadbed not properly leveled, poor rail alignment, and carelessly laid cross ties. One government inspector declared it the worst railroad he had ever seen. But that didn't stop the railroaders. Railroadmen risked life and limb on their job. Many would end up dead or permanently crippled. More than 6 times as many railroadmen as passengers were killed or injured in accidents during the early days of the Transcontinental Railroad. Railroading ranked as one of America's most dangerous jobs.
Railroads didn't so much care about the safety aspects. They were concerned about the bottom line and the dollar and the profit. So the less they had to change, the better.
The pioneer Western railroaders were a courageous breed. They endured the hardships and dangers with a sense of pride. In the next 3 decades, their territory would expand out from Missouri to the Pacific Northwest, from above the Canadian border to below the Mexican. The engineer was the hero, revered along with the mythical cowboy or gunfighter of the West. He was assigned to an engine for years and cared for it with pride. Often his life was on the line.
Many times, if he saw disaster pending, he would instruct his firemen to bail out, or as they used to say, take to the birds, we're going to crash. And he'd stay with his locomotive, trying his best to control it, and many times they were killed in crashes.
The firemen worked hard, for his $2.40 a day. Early engines burned anywhere from 40 to 200 pounds of coal per mile. Sometimes a fireman might move more than 2 tons of coal in less than half an hour. One danger that was unique to Western railroading was buffalo.
The buffalo at that time were a problem. They would get on the tracks, preventing the train from progressing forward. You can imagine 1,000 buffalo on the tracks. On one occasion, the story goes that the buffalo had stopped this train. The engineer was incensed with those animals on the track, and so he took a shot at them. They stampeded and derailed the locomotive.
One of the great ironies of the Pacific Railroad is that we created this wonderful 2,000-mile system across the continent, and yet we still didn't know with any real certainty how to make trains stop reliably. And especially crossing the Sierra Nevada mountain range, the Rockies, and the kinds of hills they faced, that was really a critical factor.
The railroad companies quickly realized that if the railroad was going to expand in the West, they needed to be faster and safer. Thousands of people rose to the challenge, but only a few would know success. As railroaders braved incredible dangers on the job, thousands of inventors from all walks of life were turning their attention to fixing the technology.
In the mid-19th century, you could think of the railroad industry as being a combination of the automobile industry, the computer industry, and the television industry of our day. So that's where the money was, that's where the inventors went, that's where men went to make their fortunes, to create this industrial empire.
The area of most intense interest was the inventions that made trains faster, more reliable, and safer. The coupler, the device that joined railroad cars together, attracted more inventors than any other railroad device. Whoever came up with the idea of how to make a safer and better coupler stood to make a fortune. One inventor tackling the problem was an ex-Confederate Civil War major who worked in a dry goods store in Alexandria, Virginia. In his free time, Eli Janey took pen to paper searching for a solution. At that time, the standard method of coupling cars was the link and pin system. It called for the brakeman to stand between the two cars, and while one of the cars was in motion, he had to hold and guide the pin into the iron hoop of the links as they came together.
There was a split second of timing wherein you had to slip this into the pocket, hold it up, and drop the pin, and get your fingers extricated from that space before the car couplings literally touched. If that happened and your fingers weren't clear, no fingers. Sometimes no hands. If a slip and fall occurred, a man could be trapped in between the cars and gored, crushed, maimed, killed.
The technology was so dangerous that virtually every brakeman was maimed. Back then, a railroad foreman could size up an applicant by looking at his hands.
When the yardmaster or the trainmaster would ask the brakeman to see his hands, if he had all his digits, he was a greenhorn. If he had one missing, he had a little experience. If he had a couple missing, he was pretty good. But if he had all his fingers missing, they would make a signalman out of him or some job that he didn't have to use his hands.
One day, Eli Janey sketched out a simple design for a coupler. His idea was for a kind of knuckle coupler that brought the cars together, like two hands grasping each other. A lever running outside the car operated it, so brakemen would no longer have to stand between the cars. At the same time Janey was perfecting his automatic coupler, another inventor was determined to overhaul the railroad's braking system. Back then, the braking on trains was not done by the engineer in the cab, but by hand, in a dangerous maneuver where one slip could cost the brakeman his life. We had to ride out on top when the train was moving. That took nerve, coordination, timing, and a perfect sense of balance to go over the top of a freight train. Winter or summer, rain, snow, sleet, ice all over the roofs, and on brake wheels and handholds. Dick Nelson 1871. Here was one more way that brakemen could lose their lives. Not only were the handbrakes hard to reach, they were difficult to operate. Uneven braking could cause a train to separate. If brakes were applied too tightly, friction heated the wheels, causing them to slide dangerously along the track. Brakemen would be forced to make quick adjustments on several cars to keep the train from speeding out of control. George Westinghouse explored ways of improving the braking system by using compressed air. The idea of using air to somehow stop trains and control their speed had been around for decades.
There had been steam brakes, there had been very crude air brakes before that, but they were neither reliable nor did they really work together as a system. Westinghouse became aware of the use of compressed air to run drills in tunnels in Europe, long railroad tunnels, and thought that if they could run air through a rubber hose 5,000 feet in Europe to run a drill, well, by God, he could run air through a hose underneath a train and use it to stop the rolling motion.
Westinghouse's breakthrough for an automatic brake was that each car would carry its own reservoir of compressed air. The engineer, with a valve in the cab, could regulate the air pressure in a train line, which was a continuous pipe running the length of the train, connecting the air brake control valves on each car. By regulating the pressure in that train line, the engineer could apply and release all the brakes on that train simultaneously.
It was cheaper, on the whole, for the railroads just to continue maiming and killing its employees than it was to actually invest millions of dollars in these new technologies.
Perhaps the strongest motivation for the railroad companies to install air brakes and automatic couplers was the public outcry. People were growing more outraged by the carnage on the rails. At last, in 1893, Congress passed the Railroad Safety Appliance Act that required the railroads to apply the air brakes, automatic couplers, and other safety features. It was a watershed piece of legislation and the beginning of the process of regulating industrial safety. In an ironic twist in history, this safety technology that the railroads feared would cost too much actually improved productivity and saved money. The automatic coupler made it possible to hitch up cars faster and without the need for human intervention in each coupling, while the air brakes permitted the railroads to operate longer and heavier trains far more reliably. While Janey and Westinghouse were worrying about safety, there was another man who dreamed of something far grander: luxury. In the 1870s, affluent East Coast types rented private railroad cars for hunting expeditions in the Wild West. This luxury would cost $300 per week. Jerome Marble, a Massachusetts manufacturer and sportsman, hired one of the earliest hunting cars for his family to camp on the Dakota Plains. The car came fully loaded with gun racks, dog kennels, and large ice boxes to preserve trophies of the hunt. The mobile hunting lodge was just one of the more extravagant innovations of a man who was determined to make his fortune on railroad passenger travel: George Mortimer Pullman.
On one of his trips west from New York State, on his way to Chicago, George Pullman rented a sleeping car berth for the dollar it cost and climbed into it just to see how bad it was. And it was dark and cramped and small, and he thought it was atrocious. And legend has it that at that point he decided that was a way he could make his fortune.
His lifetime ambition was born: to replicate the elegance and comfort of first-class hotels on wheels. Other innovators experimented with sleepers, but Pullman was the one who came up with the idea of hinged upper berths that could be folded against the ceiling during the day. And the reclining seat could double as a bed. In 1864, he invested his entire savings of $20,000 to build the magnificent sleeper car he called the Pioneer. no expense was spared in the craftsmanship. Each Pullman sleeping car mirrored the ornate Victorian style that was sweeping America. By the time transcontinental travel became popular, George Pullman had the market for overnight luxury railroading sewn up. In the 1870s, he was leasing to the Western Lines his own fleet of cars, fully equipped and staffed. In 1870, the price of a first-class ticket between Omaha and Sacramento was $100, equivalent to over $3,000 today. Providing comfort was not the only problem that Pullman decided to tackle. People needed to eat. In the early years of transcontinental rail travel, passengers ate their meals during short stops at stations along the way.
We found the quality of the food on the whole bad. All three meals were almost identical: tea, buffalo steaks, antelope chops, sweet potatoes, and boiled Indian corn with hoe cakes and syrup ad nauseum. William Robertson, 1873.
One traveler, having dined happily on a delicious chicken stew for breakfast, was later upset to learn that he had eaten prairie dog. Pullman guessed that this was no way to attract the rich clientele he was aiming for. In 1868, he introduced the most elegant dining car of its day, named the Delmonico, after a famous restaurant owner in New York City. The Pullman staff turned out 12-course meals. Women were proud to have gained 5 to 10 pounds on a one-month round-trip journey aboard a Hotel Express.
The foods were the best of ducks and fowl, roast beef, roast ham, boiled ham, fresh potatoes, fresh baked breads, desserts made on board, even fresh Rocky Mountain trout when crossing over the Continental Divide, caught and delivered directly to the train.
Most of the cars even carried ice and could serve ice cream and exotic frozen desserts, which for people traveling across the desert in the late 19th century was nothing short of miraculous.
With first-class business booming, Pullman built cars for smoking, reading, listening to music, and lounging. The decor included etched and stained plate glass, plush seat cushions, marble and walnut washstands, damask curtains, and massive mirrors and frames of gilded walnut. The Pullman cars were a symbol of America's manufacturing supremacy, offering unrivaled elegance,